The most painful thing is not being left. It is being left while still being kept. There is a specific kind of emotional experience that most people never find the words for. And because they cannot name it, they cannot escape it. It sits somewhere between confusion and grief, between holding on and already knowing. It is the feeling of standing in a room where the door is open, but no one is asking you to leave and no one is asking you to stay. Most people who find themselves in a relationship with an avoidant person spend months, sometimes years, trying to decode behavior that was never meant to be decoded. They search for signals. They replay conversations. They measure the distance between what was said and what was felt. And the longer they search, the deeper they fall into a trap that has nothing to do with love and everything to do with psychology. What you are about to hear is not a list of red flags. It is not permission to leave. It is not a warning to protect your ego. It is something far more uncomfortable than that, because the 4 signs that an avoidant no longer wants you in his life are not found in what he does. They are found in what you have already been choosing not to see and why. The answer to that question will change the way you understand yourself long after this relationship is over. The avoidant person did not arrive in your life wearing a warning label. He arrived with warmth, with moments of genuine connection, with glimpses of depth that made you believe you had found something rare. And those moments were real. That is the first thing you must understand. Because if you dismiss them as illusions, you will never understand what actually happened between the two of you. The connection was real. The problem is that real connection and the capacity to sustain real connection are 2 entirely different things. And most people confuse the presence of one for the guarantee of the other. Something shifts inside a relationship with an avoidant person long before any visible sign appears. It does not happen like a door slamming. It happens like a window slowly fogging over from the inside. The light still comes through. The shape of things is still visible. But something has changed in the quality of the atmosphere between you, and you feel it before you can explain it. Your nervous system registers it. Your body knows. But your mind, trained by hope, by investment, by the sunk cost of everything you have already given, your mind begins negotiating with reality instead of reading it. Denial in a relationship does not look like stupidity. It looks like loyalty. It looks like patience. It looks like giving someone the benefit of the doubt because you believe in them, because you have seen their goodness, because you are the kind of person who does not walk away from people when things get difficult. And this is where a painful irony lives. The very qualities that make you a devoted, emotionally intelligent partner are the same qualities that can keep you anchored to a relationship that is already ended in the other person's mind, while it is still very much alive in yours. Psychologists who study attachment theory often focus on the behavior of the avoidant, the withdrawal, the need for space, the discomfort with emotional intimacy. But what rarely gets examined with equal depth is the internal architecture of the person on the receiving end. Because the empath, the anxiously attached person, the deeply feeling individual, they do not just respond to avoidant behavior. They are shaped by it in ways that go far below the surface of conscious awareness. Every moment of withdrawal trains you to be more attentive. Every silence teaches you to listen harder. Every cold response conditions you to work more carefully to restore warmth. Without realizing it, you have been in a psychological training program, and the curriculum was never written for your benefit. There is a concept in behavioral psychology known as variable reinforcement. It is the same principle that makes gambling addictive. When a reward is given inconsistently, sometimes present, sometimes absent, never predictable, the brain does not disengage. It intensifies its focus. It becomes more alert, more motivated, more consumed by the pursuit of the reward than it would ever be if the reward were given reliably. This is not a weakness of character. This is a feature of the human nervous system, and it means that the moments when an avoidant man pulled away from you did not reduce your attachment to him. They deepened it. The pain of his absence did not push you out. It pulled you further in. And understanding this is not about blame. It is about clarity, because you cannot make a free decision inside a dynamic you do not understand. Now here is where the first sign begins to reveal itself. Not as a behavior he is performing, but as a pattern you have been living inside without a name for it. The first sign that an avoidant no longer wants you in his life is that he has stopped being uncomfortable around you. Read that again. Most people expect withdrawal to feel cold, tense, or obviously distant. And sometimes it does, but there is a more advanced stage that comes after the tension fades, and it is far more final. When a person who has been emotionally guarded around you suddenly becomes relaxed, easy, unbothered in your presence, not warm, not open, just calm, what you are witnessing is not growth. You are witnessing indifference. The tension between two people exists because both people still have something at stake. When that tension disappears on one side, it is not because that person has become more secure. It is because they have internally released the relationship. The emotional weight is gone because the emotional investment is gone. And indifference in the architecture of human psychology is not the opposite of love. It is the completion of its ending. Most people misread this sign entirely. They experience the sudden calmness, the lack of conflict, the absence of emotional reaction, and they interpret it as peace. They think the relationship has finally stabilized. They feel relieved. They move toward him, more open than before, believing the storm has passed. But what has actually happened is that one person has already walked off the battlefield, while the other is still standing there, ready to negotiate. This is one of the most psychologically devastating mismatches in human relationships, and it almost never gets named for what it is. The second sign goes even deeper, and it lives in a place most people are deeply reluctant to examine. It lives not in his behavior, but in the conversations you are no longer having, and more importantly, in the conversations you have stopped wanting to have. There is a moment in a deteriorating relationship where both people begin to unconsciously collude in a kind of emotional silence. Not because there is nothing to say, but because both people on some level already know what the conversation would reveal, and neither person is ready to face it yet. He is not ready because acknowledgement would require him to be emotionally present in a way that his psychology genuinely cannot sustain. And you are not ready because acknowledgement would end something you are not yet willing to end. So both of you perform a version of normally. You talk about ordinary things. You move through the shared spaces of your life together, and somewhere beneath all of it, a truth sits in the room with you, unspoken, immovable, patient. What makes this sign so psychologically significant is that it reveals something not just about him, but about you. The avoidant man in your life has gone quiet not only because he is withdrawing, he has gone quiet because he has concluded consciously or not that honesty in this relationship will cost more than he is willing to pay. But you have also gone quiet, and your silence is carrying something different. A fear that if you ask the question clearly enough to deserve a clear answer, the answer will destroy the last version of hope you are holding. This is not cowardice, this is human. But it is also a sign because the relationship where both people are afraid of the truth of the relationship is a relationship that has already become something other than real. There is a philosopher named Eric who wrote that love is not primarily a relationship to a specific person. It is an attitude, an orientation of character, which determines the relatedness of a person to the world as a whole. Most people read that and think it is a beautiful sentiment. But what it actually means in the context of what you are living is something far more confronting. It means that the way an avoidant man relates to you is not an exception to the way he relates to the world. It is an expression of it. His withdrawal from you is not about you. It is not a judgment of your worth. It is the inevitable output of a psychological structure that was formed long before he ever met you. A structure built around the belief that closeness is dangerous, that need is weakness, that love always eventually becomes a cage. And until he does the deep, sustained, often agonizing work of dismantling that structure, not for you but for himself, the pattern will repeat. Not because he is broken, but because he is living in complete alignment with the only emotional logic he has ever known. This is the insight that most attachment content will not give you, because it is not comfortable and it does not leave room for the fantasy that the right amount of patience, the right amount of love, the right approach will eventually unlock him. The avoidant person in your life is not locked. He is exactly as open as he has chosen to be. And that choice, however unconscious it may be, is a complete and total expression of his current psychological reality. Understanding that truth does not make the pain smaller, but it does make the pain cleaner. There is a difference between suffering that teaches you something and suffering that simply consumes you. The person who stays in a deteriorating relationship without understanding the psychological mechanics of what is happening does not suffer less. They suffer longer. And the suffering leaves them more confused, more self-doubting, more emotionally disoriented than when they entered. But the person who begins to see clearly, even when what they see is painful, begins to suffer in a way that has direction. That kind of suffering builds something. It carves out a deeper understanding of the self, a more honest relationship with reality, and eventually a kind of quiet strength that cannot be borrowed from anyone else because it was forged entirely from within. Carrying that understanding forward, the third sign begins to take shape. And this one is the most psychologically layered of all four. It is this: he has stopped trying to manage your perception of him. In the early stages of any relationship, and especially in a relationship with an avoidant man, there is a performance happening beneath the surface. Not a dishonest performance, necessarily, but a managed one. He is aware of how he appears to you. He notices when you are disappointed. He responds to that disappointment, even if only minimally, because your perception of him still matters to him. He might not be able to give you everything you need emotionally, but he is still invested enough in the relationship or in his image within the relationship to course correct when he senses the gap between you is becoming too visible. This management of perception is not love, but it is a sign of ongoing investment. It means he still cares about what exists between you, even if he cannot fully show up for it. When that management disappears, when he stops noticing your disappointment, stops responding to the emotional temperature of the relationship, stops making even the minimal adjustments he used to make, what has happened is not that he has become more comfortable. What has happened is that the relationship has dropped below the threshold of priority in his inner world. You are still physically present. The relationship may still technically exist, but in the psychological economy of his attention, the effort required to maintain your perception of him is no longer being allocated. And this is a form of erasure that is particularly difficult to name because it does not look like cruelty. It looks like carelessness. And carelessness, when it replaces what was once at least minimal attentiveness, is one of the quietest and most final forms of ending. What makes this sign even more psychologically revealing is what it exposes in the person experiencing it. Because when someone stops managing your perception of them, the natural human response is to work harder to make yourself visible again, to say something more striking, to be more present, to create a moment compelling enough that it pulls his attention back toward you. And in doing so, without realizing it, you have taken over the management of both sides of the relationship. You are now doing the emotional labor of maintaining connection for both of you. You are generating enough relational energy for two people because one person has quietly stopped generating any. And the tragedy of this dynamic is not just that it is exhausting, it is that it is invisible. Because from the outside and even from the inside, it can look like a relationship that is still functioning. Two people are still present. Conversations still happen. But the weight distribution has become so unequal that what you are maintaining is no longer a relationship. It is a monument to what the relationship once was, somewhere in the middle of all of this. And this is a truth that almost no one in the mainstream relationship space is willing to say clearly. The question stops being about him. The question becomes about you. Not in a self-laming way, not in a way that assigns fault or diminishes the reality of what he has or has not given, but in a deeper, more honest, more psychologically mature way. The question becomes, what does it say about the story you are telling yourself that you have remained in a dynamic you already know the shape of? What belief about love, about your own worth, about what relationships are supposed to require from you has kept you standing in a room where the atmosphere has been thinning for months? This is not a comfortable question. It is not meant to be because the answer to it is not about him at all. The answer lives entirely within you in the architecture of your own attachment patterns, your own early experiences of love, your own deep and largely unconscious beliefs about what you deserve and what love is supposed to cost. The fourth and final sign is the one that most people encounter first but understand last. It is the sign that is most often misread, most often rationalized away, and most often used as a source of false hope, precisely because it feels like the opposite of ending. The fourth sign is this: he begins to be kinder to you in a general surface-level way, more agreeable, less reactive, occasionally warmer, while simultaneously becoming less emotionally specific about you. He might ask how your day was. He might be more patient in small moments. He might even say something occasionally that sounds like affection. But if you listen carefully, and this requires a level of honest attention that is genuinely painful to sustain, you will notice that nothing he says is particular to you anymore. The observations, the questions, the small gestures, they carry no fingerprint of genuine intimacy. They are the behaviors of a person who is managing a transition, who is on some level preparing both of you for a distance that he has already accepted internally, but has not yet found the language or the courage to make explicit. This kind of surface warmth is psychologically one of the most disorienting experiences a person can have in a relationship, because warmth is what you have been reaching for. And when it appears, even in this diluted, general, emotionally non-specific form, the part of you that has been starved for connection reaches toward it instinctively. You feel hope. You feel that something has shifted. You lean in. And the leaning in feels justified because something did shift. It just shifted in the direction you do not want it to have shifted in. What you are experiencing is not a return. It is a farewell being delivered in the only language he knows how to use, one that keeps the emotional temperature low, avoids confrontation, and allows him to feel that he is being decent while he is in truth already gone. There is a concept in existential psychology that speaks to this directly. Rollo May wrote about the difference between being present and being available. A person can be physically available in the room, responsive, technically participatory, while being existentially absent. Their presence does not land. Their words do not carry weight. Their attention does not penetrate. And when you are in a relationship with someone who has become existentially absent, no amount of your own presence can fill the space their absence has created. You can be more interesting, more loving, more emotionally available, more patient, more beautiful, in every way that a person can be beautiful, and none of it will reach him. Not because you are not enough, but because the channel through which it would need to travel has been closed from his side. And the closing of that channel is the fourth sign made manifest. What runs beneath all four of these signs? The indifference replacing tension, the mutual silence around truth, the disappearance of perceptual management, and the surface warmth emptied of emotional specificity, is a single psychological reality that is deeply uncomfortable to accept. The avoidant person in your life did not stop wanting you because of something you did or failed to do. He stopped wanting you, or more precisely, stopped allowing himself to want you, because wanting in his psychological world is one of the most dangerous things a person can do. To want someone is to need them. To need them is to be vulnerable to their absence. And to be vulnerable to absence is in the emotional logic of the avoidant mind to guarantee eventual pain. So the system does what it was designed to do. It retreats, it distances, it slowly dismantles the connection. Not out of malice, but out of a form of self-preservation so deeply ingrained that the person enacting it often does not even recognize it as a choice. To him, it does not feel like leaving. It feels like breathing. And this is where the most important question of this entire conversation begins to form. Because if his withdrawal is not about you and your staying is not entirely about him, then what is this really about? What are both of you actually doing inside this dynamic? What are both of you protecting? What are both of you afraid to lose? And what does that fear reveal about the deeper structure of who each of you has become? Every relationship is a mirror, not a flattering one. Not the kind that reflects back what you hope to see, but the kind that shows you with uncomfortable precision exactly where your unresolved psychological architecture is still under construction. The avoidant man in your life did not create your wounds, but he found them with extraordinary accuracy. The way water finds the exact crack in a foundation and settles there. Not because it chose that specific place, but because that is where the opening was. And the reason this relationship has held you the way it has, the reason you are still thinking about it, still analyzing it, still searching for the explanation that will finally make the pain make sense, is not because of what he gave you. It is because of what this relationship activated in you that was already there, waiting long before he arrived. Attachment science tells us something that sounds clinical, but carries enormous emotional weight when you truly let it land. The patterns we develop in our earliest relationships, the ones formed before we had language, before we had the cognitive capacity to understand what was happening to us, become the invisible grammar of every intimate connection we form for the rest of our lives. We do not choose these patterns consciously. We do not sit down as adults and decide to be drawn to emotional unavailability. or to find stability somehow less compelling than intensity, or to interpret the withholding of love as a challenge worth rising to. These responses are installed at a level far beneath conscious decision-making. They are written into the nervous system the way a language is written into the brain of a child. Not through deliberate study, but through immersion, repetition, and the desperate necessity of making sense of the world through the only tools available at the time. Knowing this does not dissolve the pain, but it does something more valuable than that. It relocates the pain. It moves it from the story of what he did to you into the story of what you are now being asked to understand about yourself. And that relocation is everything, because a pain that lives in the story of what someone else did to you keeps you permanently in the position of a person waiting for someone else to make it right. But a pain that lives in the story of your own psychological development, your own patterns, your own unexamined beliefs, your own hunger for a specific kind of love that mirrors something you once experienced or once desperately needed. That pain becomes workable. That pain becomes a door rather than a wall. Here is the psychological observation that most relationship content will never make because it is too unsettling for a mainstream audience. The person who is most drawn to an avoidant partner is almost never drawn to them, despite the emotional unavailability. On some level, not consciously, not deliberately, not with any malicious intent toward themselves. They are drawn to them because of it. Because emotional unavailability to someone whose early experience of love was inconsistent, conditional, or emotionally complex does not feel foreign. It feels familiar. And the nervous system, in its relentless drive toward pattern recognition and homeostasis, does not distinguish between familiar and safe. It registers familiar as known. And known, however painful, carries less existential terror than the unknown. This is why genuine, consistent, emotionally available love can sometimes feel not just unfamiliar, but actively uncomfortable, even suspicious to someone whose nervous system was calibrated in an environment where love always came with uncertainty attached. The avoidant man, in his own parallel psychological universe, is running an almost identical program from the opposite direction. Where you were conditioned to pursue love that withholds, he was conditioned to withhold love from anything that pursues. His early experiences taught him that closeness leads to engulfment, that emotional need leads to loss of self, that the price of deep connection is the surrender of autonomy. And so he built a psychological fortress, not out of coldness, but out of a child's desperate ingenuity. The fortress worked. It protected him. And now, as an adult, the fortress is still standing, still operational, still interpreting every genuine approach of intimacy as a potential threat. Even when the person approaching carries nothing but sincerity and care, he is not rejecting you. He is executing a protection protocol that was never updated to account for the fact that the original danger no longer exists. Both of you, in other words, are living inside outdated maps. You are navigating a present relationship using psychological seagraphy drawn from past experiences that may have very little to do with the reality of who either of you actually is today. And the tragedy, the real tragedy, the one that goes deeper than heartbreak, is that two people can be genuinely well suited for each other at the level of values, at the level of vision, at the level of what they dream about and what they find meaningful in the world, and still be completely unable to build a stable relationship because their nervous systems are locked in a silent war that neither of them fully understands and neither of them consciously chose. This is the observation that should sit with you long after this video ends. Not as an excuse for what he could not give, not as a reason to diminish the reality of your own pain, but as a framework for something more important than either of those things. For understanding, because understanding is the only tool powerful enough to actually break a cycle rather than simply interrupt it. You can leave a relationship without understanding it and find yourself 6 months or 2 years later in a relationship with different scenery and the same emotional architecture. The names change, the faces change, the specific behaviors change, but the dynamic, the pull, the hunger, the specific shape of the love you are reaching for remains unchanged because the pattern was never in them. The pattern was always in you. And that is not a condemnation, that is an invitation.